Hello, bonjour. Welcome, everyone. My name is Eric Chaput, Business Advisor here at the World Trade Centre Winnipeg. I would like to begin today's webinar with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the land of the Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Innu, Denisilune, and Dakota Oyate nations. We acknowledge we are also on the homelands of the Red River Métis and that the northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. Manitoba Environmental Industries Associations and the World Trade Centre Winnipeg team respects the treaties that were made on these territories and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and present throughout our nation. Thank you all for joining today's webinar, Discover the SR&ED Program 101 Overview, which will be presented by Andrea Legary in partnership with MEIA. I would like to call on Heather from MEIA.
Hi, thanks, Eric. My name is Heather Roscoe. I'm the Programming and Training Coordinator at MEIA. I just wanted to thank World Trade Centre for partnering with us on this webinar and Andrea for all the expertise. I can't wait to hear all about this. I just wanted to highlight some upcoming events. One in particular that MEIA's got on March 25th and 26th, we have a business sustainability workshop. It's in partnership with the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce, who are very generously offering to fully subsidize this workshop. So I just wanted you all to know about it. It's fully subsidized for qualifying businesses. So if you're a Manitoba-based business, meaning your head office is located in Manitoba, if you've been operating for more than 2 years, and if your business has the ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you can attend this workshop for free. If you're not sure about that last point, whether or not your business has the ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, just reach out to me and I'll connect you with the Manitoba Chambers. So this workshop, I wanted to highlight because I know there's a lot of uncertainty with announcements that are coming from our neighbors to the south, and uncertainty can make people nervous to act, but there is benefit to developing an action plan to align sustainability with business goals. We all know about reducing greenhouse gas emissions can help cut costs in terms of saving energy and improving efficiency, as well as how more and more customers are looking for companies that can show that they are environmentally friendly. But beyond that, climate preparedness helps to keep you ahead of changing regulations and, importantly, may open doors to new trading partners. So it is a feel-good thing to do the right thing and be environmentally friendly, but it is also a critical strategy to help make your business more resilient in times of uncertainty. So that workshop is called Business Sustainability, and it's on March 25th and 26th. I'll put a link to it in the chat, as well as some other events and training we've got coming up. Our AGM is on April 23rd. It's a full-day conference. So if you want to network with people in the natural resources, energy, and environmental sector, that usually draws about 150 to 200 people. And there's lots of networking opportunities on that day. And we also have our golf tournament, a fundraiser golf tournament on June 4th, if you're a networker and want to come have a fun day of golf. But yeah, we've got lots of other stuff. I'll just throw in the group chat. And I will pass it back to you, Eric. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, so before we begin, I want to share a few housekeeping information. Please send all your webinar questions directly to the chat box at the top of your screen, and they will try to answer as many questions as possible during this session, or whether it's at the end of the session. For all logistical questions, please send them directly to the chat box, and I will answer your question as soon as possible. And you will also receive a PDF copy of the recording and of this presentation within the next week. Okay, so let's kickstart this webinar here. I would like to introduce you to Andrea Legary. Andrea is the managing partner at the Recoup group, where she provides assistance to companies in a wide range of industries, to access the scientific research and experimental development tax credit to fund the investment of their technology. Prior to working in SR&ED, Andrea worked as an engineer and participating in several of Canada's leading space and defense projects. Okay, awesome. So welcome, Andrea, and the floor is all yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I am going to be looking at my PowerPoint notes and displaying the screen. So if you do have questions and you put them in the chat, Eric will be making note of those. I am open to answering questions as we go along. And then if we are getting behind, we'll then maybe shift to focusing on getting the material out, and then we can answer any questions at the end. So thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank Manitoba Environmental Industry Association and World Trade Centre for their organization of today's event. And I'm pleased to share some of the basics of SR&ED. It is important to note that the information being shared today is for information and background on the program, as you will come to appreciate as we talk about some of the policies and guidelines around SR&ED. It is an intricate program, and your fact pattern must be analyzed against the policies to understand how each concept applies in your scenario. So I will do my best to, especially if there are specific questions, to answer those. However, the most questions in SR&ED of is this eligible, how does this apply, usually are met with a response of it depends, and it does sort of require a bit of an analysis of your exact specific scenario. So as Eric mentioned, I'm Andrea Legary. I'm the managing partner at the Recoup Group, and at Recoup, all we do is SR&ED. So last year, we completed approximately 75 successful claims for SR&ED and prepared over 100 project descriptions to support those in a wide variety of industries such as crop science, aero engine research, consulting engineering, and nowadays, many of those projects having that artificial intelligence component. I personally have exclusively been doing SR&ED for the last 11 years after spending my first decade of my career in the aerospace and defense industry, as Eric mentioned. I have a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Aerospace Engineering as well as my MBA. I hold a strong belief that research is sort of the key to our prosperous future here. And so outside of my day job as a SR&ED consultant, I do volunteer as the board chair for Research Manitoba, and then also serve as board director on both Emily, the Enterprise Machine Intelligence and Learning Initiative, which has a focus in digital ag, as well as Westcard, which is doing aero engines research. So again, just to provide some background on myself and the importance of research. So the objective today is to provide an understanding of the key elements of the SR&ED program, and then introduce the elements of the concepts around eligible work and allowable expenditures. I also intend to provide a bit of information on some of the recent announcements around potential changes that would be coming to the SR&ED program, things that were announced as part of the fall economic statement. And we are still waiting, as I'll mention, as I discuss those things, we are still waiting to see how those become law and if they become law once our government returns to session. Today's session is meant to be complemented by our second session, where we will look a little bit closer at how you would document and demonstrate to the CRA that you've done the work that you have said you have done. And so that session will dive a little bit deeper into the concepts around documentation of your claim, and is on, I believe it's Wednesday, March 12th, but we'll make sure that we have that correct date for you guys. So the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Program is often abbreviated as SR&ED, and we pronounce it as SR&ED. And the intent is to encourage and support Canadian private sector innovation. Canada provides several incentives to support R&D, including the National Research Council's Industrial Research program, the IRAP program, as well as MyTax, which helps fund industry academic collaborations. But SR&ED is a bit unique, and we'll talk a bit about that, but it does allow for risk and investment in R&D. And it provides investment tax credits to Canadian taxpayers, which includes companies, individuals, trusts, and partnerships that are performing eligible R&D in Canada and that file claims within the prescribed deadline. The program, unlike MyTax, et cetera, which are administered by those specific entities and National Research Council, SR&ED is administered as part of the income tax system, and it's you apply via the income tax system, and it's administered by the Canada Revenue Agency. Most provinces offer tag-along provincial R&D tax credit programs that work seamlessly with the federal credit. Here in Manitoba, we have the Manitoba SR&ED credit, which offers a 15% tax credit for eligible SR&ED, half of which is refundable, which means you can receive cash. Half is non-refundable, where it reduces your taxes owing. And here in Manitoba, we are a compliant province. And what that means is that our program is also administered via the CRA. And so it is a separate form, but it is not a separate process. And this does differ, though, in other provinces. So if your entity offers or operates in other provinces across Canada, it's important to work to understand the provincial rules in your area. Quebec and Alberta, for example, have their own provincial tax authorities who may also review the claims. So the unique aspect of SR&ED is that it's an entitlement or a demand program. And that means that if your company is doing eligible work, you're entitled to claim it as part of your tax return. So this is a bit different than IRAP or MyTax, whereby you would apply ahead of time and receive permission and then submit claims for your eligible agreed upon expenditures. In this case, you are to assess yourself against the eligibility requirements as defined by the CRA policies. And if you have eligible work, you are entitled then to claim those on your tax return, and there's no pre-approval process that is required. The CRA recently has started to provide some annual program statistics around SR&ED. And so for the most recent period ending March 31st, 2024, there was approximately 60,000 SR&ED projects claimed. Those 60,000 projects were claimed within 20,000 SR&ED claims. And so on average, 3 projects per claim, though by experience, I would say it's much more common that many companies have 1 SR&ED project. And then some of the larger claimants would have 10, 20, or even more SR&ED projects. The acceptance rate for the period ending March 31st, 2024 was 97%. So 91% of the claims were approved or accepted as filed. 6% of them were accepted after some modifications. So upon review, there was some modifications that were recommended by the CRA. And 3% of the claims were denied. So we're looking at about a 9% audit and compliance rate if it is based on these statistics as reported by the CRA. They also provide some information recently, so for 2024, on the percentage of credits by field of science. So SR&ED must be performed in an eligible field of science or technology, with most natural sciences being eligible under the program, such as physics, math, biology, and chemistry. And applied sciences are also eligible, such as mechanical engineering, environmental engineering, and electrical. The social sciences are not eligible in the definition of SR&ED. So that is very relevant right now, where there are projects which may be using software or algorithms or data analytics to predict consumer behavior or other social science types areas of work. So while the work to address uncertainty or scientific questions within, management, economics, psychology, education, and law are not eligible, there is potential that if within the ability to statistically model those or within the software program, there was eligibility within those areas, that potentially that project still could be eligible for SR&ED, but it would not be the advancements in consumer behavior, for example, that would be eligible. You'd have to define how you were advancing the area of, statistical modeling, artificial intelligence, or the software programming. And that's just a trend we're seeing right now. And that's sort of highlighted here with this 39% of the projects being in software development. From our experience, what I think there are a lot of software development projects, but also what's driving that is even within foods processing, there's a lot of claims for use of software and artificial intelligence and automation to try and improve those processes, whereby they may have selected software development as the area of advancements on their claim. So as we'll jump into the detailed requirements of the program, one might ask why even bother claiming SR&ED? And there are positive financial benefits, as well as it helps to strengthen your competitive edge. Your Canadian competitors are likely claiming SR&ED if you are in an area of eligible work, and so you don't want to leave money on the table. And if you have global competitors, by taking advantage of the Canadian SR&ED program, you may be able to achieve a competitive edge over others to invest back into your R&D and to grow your business. At a high level, the financial benefits of claiming SR&ED is it does allow for flexible deductions on the current expenditures for SR&ED. So I'm an engineer and I always work with my other half, Ms. Ren Gargan, who is a CPA with a tax background. And so this is really more her area. But at a high level, when you claim your normal expenditures, you may expense them on your tax return. What SR&ED allows for is the potential to pool those expenditures and carry them forward if you do not need that deduction in the year. And it's a very unique characteristic of the SR&ED program that sometimes people don't think of. What's more commonly thought of as a financial benefit is the investment tax credits. And those reduce your federal and provincial taxes payable. But if you do not owe taxes, they also can provide cash back where you're a small private Canadian controlled corporation. And if you do have excess ITCs where they are non-refundable and they are to reduce your taxes owing, they can be carried back 3 years to reduce your taxes in those prior 3 years, or you can carry them forward up to 20 years to reduce your taxation in a future period. In its simplest form, but there are some more complex rules around what creates an eligible corporation and the total dollar value of how many expenditures you can claim at the enhanced rate here. But at the simplest form, a Canadian controlled private corporation is eligible for refundable investment tax credit of 35%, where other corporations, individuals, partnerships, and trusts are eligible for non-refundable investment tax credits at 15%. So that's a reduction of their federal taxes owing. Where for CCPCs, you may be eligible to have that 35% credit paid back to you as cash, even if in fact you do not owe taxes in that period. This is one of the things that when we talk about potential changes as part of the economic statement, there are some proposed changes to one, the amount or the calculation of what makes an eligible Canadian controlled private corporation, and then also the potential to include eligible public corporations into this enhanced rate. But at this time, it is only CCPCs.
Hey, Andrea?
Yeah.
There is a question in the chat here.
Sure.
Jean says, are the percentage based on application or set by program priorities?
The program priority, so it's based on oh, sorry, Ren. It looks like Ren maybe had so Ren is from the Recoup group as well. It looks like Ren had attempted to answer some of these questions. Yeah, so this is it's driven by the claims that are made. So where NRC may change like that, they're looking at more artificial intelligence programs versus agriculture in a year. The SR&ED program, there, if the area of science is eligible, they don't actually allocate the budget per industry. It's just based on the claims that are received. So the claims that are the division between software and civil engineering is not the government determining what amount of money goes out by area of science. That would just be by nature of who made those claims. Yes, and then so there's for renewable energy systems, solar, you could look at, there is a listing of the eligible areas of science, which we could provide a list to that. It's quite extensive. There is also the option, there's a category for other engineering and sciences that you could select other if specific to solar was not specific. But yes, I see there that we can provide that list of eligible areas of science, and that would be something that I'm happy to sort of provide of which box I would check. As long as it's not a social science, again, worst case, you could select other. I believe there is, though, something that would fit well to solar. So the basic, I think that addresses the current questions, but let me know, Eric, if anything else pops up. And Ren from Recoup may then attempt to answer some of them where it is financial based, where she can give a quick response. The basic requirements to carry on business or basic requirements to be a company that claims SR&ED is that you carry on business in Canada and that the SR&ED is related to your business. So for example, us as Recoup, I could not claim a SR&ED project around digital ag technologies as that's not related to the nature of my business. There's a requirement that expenditures are incurred. And so that seems basic and simple in of itself, but it's amazing how many times startups come and they feel that they see eligibility in the work that they are doing. However, they actually haven't paid themselves any salaries, or they maybe have not paid anyone for the work that's been performed to date, just because of the nature of the cash flow of the business. In order to claim the credit, you obviously have to have incurred an expenditure. There's a requirement that the activities are performed in Canada, either by you or for you, so by a Canadian contractor. There is a minor exception to that, in that 10% of your labor can be performed outside of Canada, but it's very important that that is tracked, and it is capped at 10% of your labor expenditures. And then you must file a completed claim by the CRA's reporting deadline, and that's 18 months for corporations and 17 and a half months for individuals. So SR&ED is defined in the Income Tax Act. And so and that is the legislation that controls the program. And scientific research and experimental development is defined as a systematic investigation or search carried out in a field of science or technology by means of experiment or analysis to advance scientific knowledge or achieve a technological advancement. And then the SR&ED project are all the interrelated activities that are collectively necessary to resolve the uncertainties. And it's a requirement that the attempt is pursued through a systematic and scientific methodology with appropriate scientific protocol, and it's performed by qualified individuals. There's 3 eligible streams of work. So we can claim work in the area of basic research, applied research, and experimental development. And approximately 95% of the SR&ED claims are in the experimental development phase, and that is our area, which is creating new or improving existing materials, devices, products, or processes, including incremental improvements. Basic research and applied research, we usually see more where companies are working in partnership with academic partners, but that's not to say that as a company, you might not be doing pure either basic or applied research, and those are eligible streams of work. Once you have an eligible project, we're allowed to claim the eligible support work that's commensurate with the needs to accomplish. Commensurate with the project needs to overcome the obstacles and remove the technological uncertainties. And we'll talk a bit more coming up here, a little bit more about what the uncertainty means. But every new product requires engineering, design, and testing. However, this work only qualifies if it can be differentiated from routine work by the need to resolve a technological or scientific uncertainty using a non-routine approach or like physical experimentation. It's important to note that this list of 8 eligible support activities is actually exclusive. So these are the only support activities that are eligible, and that there may be other support activities that are not specifically included in this definition that may be eligible as overhead. And that has specific implications when you're choosing a method of how to treat your overhead. And so just another thing to consider. So things like, use of an electrician or, needing a front end loader to clean an area, while that work is required for you to then do your test potentially, as it's not one of the 8 categories, it would only be eligible as an overhead and not as either labor or a contract expenditure of its own. And support work in its own is not SR&ED. And so again, that just speaks to not all engineering is SR&ED, but if we have an uncertainty and we require engineering to resolve it, then those activities may be eligible. The policy or the legislation also defines the excluded work. So market research and sales promotion are not eligible. Quality control or routine testing of materials, devices, products, or processes, research in the social sciences or humanities, prospecting, exploring, drilling, producing minerals, petroleum or natural gas, the commercial production of materials, devices, or products, style changes, or routine data collection. And so one often area that can become a bit controversial is this area of quality control. And so here, the key feature that determines whether, testing is, routine and quality control, or whether it is testing as a eligible support work activity, is the purpose of the work. So why were you performing that testing? Was it in support of to answer your research question and resolve your scientific uncertainty, or was it for the purpose of just routine testing of those commercial goods? And so that's where there is nuance. We usually look at to why the work was performed and would you have performed it if you were not trying to advance the area of science versus if you were just trying to produce your commercial goods. So while SR&ED is defined in the Income Tax Act, it is then administered by the CRA, and they have their own policies, guidelines, and procedures. And so the most well-known is the guidelines around eligibility of work. And so here's a snapshot of the fulsome list. But as you'll see from the list, while the most well-known is this guidelines of eligibility of work, there are over 21 policies, 5 different guidelines, and 3 procedures that are published for taxpayers and claim preparers to become familiar with in preparing their claim. And so, as I mentioned, while we'll scratch the surface today on what work is eligible, within each category of what's eligible for salaries, overhead, materials, as well as some specific policies around SR&ED while developing an asset, your prototypes, or SR&ED while doing a production run. There are specific policies that deal with these things. And again, your fact pattern needs to be analyzed against those specific policies to ensure that your claim is being filed in compliance with the CRA's requirements. So the eligibility policy, and again, this is the guidelines on eligibility of work for SR&ED. It speaks to eligible work having to fit both the why and the how requirement. So the why defines, why the work is being accomplished, and it must, in order for it to be SR&ED, the purpose behind the work must be to advance scientific knowledge or to achieve a technological advancement. And then how the work is performed is around a systematic investigation or search carried out in the field of science or technology by means of experiment or analysis. So the why requirement, it requires that the purpose of the work is to advance scientific knowledge. So before you have that, you would want to define what your uncertainty is so that as you're starting the project and you have a defined problem, you have to articulate where the gap is that based on your generally available knowledge, whether that be around the science or the technology, that you're not certain whether or not your objective could be achieved. It may be reasonably certain to imagine that you will be able to achieve your goal, but the path of how to get there and which method will be able to converge on performant or achieve the proper performance of whether it's a material or a process, that method of how to get there is uncertain. Some characteristics, so when you're defining your problem that might suggest that you have a gap in knowledge, is that the existing design methods are not applicable, the requirements or specifications do not conform to existing standards, there's too many variables or unknowns. So that's often the case of where if you only had to solve for how to make this as cost effective as possible, that might be possible, but that when you're also trying to do it while maintaining a high degree of quality and they start to have those interlocking and conflicting constraints, that might be where it does create a level of uncertainty into which approach will be able to solve the problem. Another indicator is that the parameters or conditions are outside of the normal operating range, the nature of the problem is evolving, and that data is not readily available. So we really have to be able to articulate that when we look into the public domain, what are those gaps in available knowledge to us that create some uncertainty into whether or not we'll be able to achieve our goals. One thing to note is that you must give consideration to your technological base or level and the business environment of your individual company. And so just for example, in software engineering, while we might know that Amazon or Microsoft has solved certain problems, if they are not publicly publishing how to do that or their solutions, you may still have a SR&ED project to investigate how to achieve that on your own. So just because someone else has solved that problem doesn't mean that you may not be eligible for SR&ED to look at it by yourself, as long as the knowledge on how to achieve what they've achieved is not publicly available. Converse to that, if internally you have a more advanced scientific and technological knowledge than anyone else in the industry, the CRA would still expect you to demonstrate how within your own knowledge base that this, you do not have the knowledge available to resolve your uncertainty. So the key is that the purpose of the work is for the generation of new knowledge that advances your understanding of the science or technology. And so I have a few slides later about when we describe our projects. And so it's important that we describe how those gaps exist. The how requirement is that that you must perform a systematic investigation or search. So I often say, think of your grade 6 science project. So we would want to define how we're generating an idea consistent with known facts. We're creating a hypothesis, which serves as your starting point for further investigation. We're going to test that hypothesis via experimentation or analysis, develop logical conclusions, and then iterate back through that process as your knowledge advances around the behavior of the system or the question at hand. And it's really important, and it's an expectation that evidence is kept as the work progresses. So the total discipline of the scientific method should be apparent in showing the CRA that you haven't just done more of a trial and error approach and looked at a binary yes, no, this solution fit the bill, that you're actually trying to understand how the science or the technology behaves. And in that case, even if you are not successful, the advancement of your understanding is still an advancement of the science and the technology. So even being unsuccessful can be a technological advancement for the purposes of SR&ED. So once you have an eligible project, as part of the claim, you prepare a technical summary, and there's 3 components to that. And I'm just going to quickly highlight them today, but we can discuss in a little bit more detail the requirements to document your work and how you would prove what you say within the submission. So the written description is capped at a maximum of 1,400 words amongst the 3 categories. So you have to define your scientific and technological uncertainty. The second section is discussing the work performed in the taxation year. And then the third section discusses what technological advancements you achieved. And this form is filed as part of your corporate tax filing. So the first section asks, what scientific or technological uncertainties did you attempt to overcome? Uncertainties that could not be removed by standard practice. So this section you have 350 words for. It's actually in the tax software governed by lines of text, and that's usually, it's 50 lines of text. You usually can fit up to 450 words. So the 350 word guideline is not hard and fast, but you are explicitly limited to the 50 lines of text in the tax software. It will not accept any further. And in this section, you should focus on what are those uncertainties that you encountered. So why did you initiate that SR&ED project? Include your objectives of the project and describe what the knowledge base is at the start of your project. And that's sort of, again, indicating your technology base level and the body of scientific knowledge available to you at the start of the project. We should describe the shortcomings or limitations of that body of knowledge. So examples of, again, what information is not available to you. Maybe there is information available, but not to this specific relationship that you need to understand. And describe how the available knowledge in the public domain is just insufficient to address your project. The largest portion of, or the longest portion of the form is this section of what work was performed in the tax year to overcome the uncertainties. And so in this section, we have up to 100 lines of text. And so we can usually fit up to 900 words. The official requirement, or the official requirement is 700 words. In this section, it's important you clearly and concisely establish the chronology of what work was performed to overcome the scientific uncertainty. and demonstrate that you use that systematic approach. So describing how you tested, we designed a prototype, and then how was it tested? What was the number of tests? What were your key variables? And what were your observations? And if it's a continuation of previous claimed projects, as projects can be multi-period and over a number of years, it's important that you focus on the work carried out in the specific tax year. So it's definitely okay to discuss the overarching project and the future work, because that can be important context for the CRA, but really matters for your eligibility in that claim is the specific work performed in this taxation year. If part of your work is performed by eligible Canadian contractors, that needs to be identified in your project description as well. And the final section is what advancements did you achieve? And so here's where we want to describe the new scientific knowledge that was gained. And so the key here, or what common error, is that claimants will describe the physical entity that was produced, where it's really about more the science and the technological knowledge that enabled you to achieve that, so that you understood the behavior of the system versus, by bolting these things all together, I achieved this physical entity. So in here, we really want to describe the actual underlying science and technological knowledge. And stay away from the more of the commercial outcomes of the project. And so we don't want to talk about job creation or that we now have this commercial item that can be sold, etc. It's about what did you learn from a science and a technology base. And then there is a requirement at the end of the documentation to check off which areas of evidence you have to support your claim. And so this will be the focus a little bit of the March 12th, is for each of these boxes that you check off, you are certifying that you have this evidence available to support your claim, and it must be retained and produced for the CRA during an audit. Generally they ask for samples, so it's not like you have to have the full binder ready to go out to them. But, if you are indicating that you have these categories of support documentation available, it's important that you do retain that and that you do have it available in the event of a CRA audit or review. And so it's, again, we'll dive a little bit more into like what some of this documentation looks like and how to put these things in place. But, at the outset of a project, it's great to have that project plan or a project birth certificate, where you define what are those technological obstacles that you might face, what are the advancements you're trying to achieve, what are those risks and uncertainties. And in some ways, I often think of it, what is the items that keep you up at night as you're embarking on the project, whereby you're 99% certain that things will go okay, but there's that 1% uncertainty if these certain behaviors come into play that you may not be able to achieve your goals. It's important that you divide your commercial activity versus your research, and that you keep the contemporaneous documentation. And so that doesn't have to be a beautiful, controlled project plan signed off by everyone in the company, but there should be detailed time records, meeting notes. Those can be emails, and those can be casual and point form, but there should be some form of documentation that was created at the time you did the work. Whether that's drawings, emails with customers and suppliers, documentation showing what those benchmarks and metrics would be. And the more documentation you have at the time you do the work, the easier it will be to support your project during an audit. So I'm just going to outline a brief example of a project that two similar projects or situations where one would be ineligible for SR&ED and one there would be potential eligibility for SR&ED. And this is an example that was used by the CRA in their previous policies that have previous guidelines for eligibility that have been since archived. But in this example, you're a chemical company and you have a new process for a chemical product. And part of that process involves a series of pumps. And they start to corrode after 6 months, even though they were originally designed to have a lifespan of over 10 years. Within the pump supplier, when they go to do an investigation, it shows that there's corrosive liquid and that they were not fundamentally designed to be in contact with corrosive liquid. So you trace the source of the corrosive liquid. There's maybe a sporadic leak in a filter system, and the leak is caused by operating at a higher temperature than it was designed for. In solving it, you're able to just replace the filter system with a new high temperature filtration unit, and this resolves the problem. This would be an example of, while there was a technological problem, it was addressed with known technology and solutions that were available to you in the public domain. So once you understood the problem, you were able to apply a known solution to resolve it. The converse to that would be that you have this sort of same fact pattern. You have the corrosion, there's leaks, and that you're not sure what is causing those. When you investigate, you discovered that the temperature of the shafts exceeds the operating temperature for the seal material. And so then the seals are failing. So again, at that stage, if you were able to just replace it with a high temperature seal, it would likely not be shred. But in the other case, if you look to understand the relationship between that specific sealing material and how it behaves in a high temperature corrosive environment, you have to do an experiment to advance your knowledge on how those seals behave at high temperatures with corrosive materials, and you're testing several different materials and establishing those behaviors, that could be an eligible project for shred. The key there would be, in this case, the manufacturer has data on how the seal materials behave at lower temperature ranges, but there's no information or data on their corrosive resistant or their physical properties at higher temperatures. So this would establish a gap in the knowledge in the public domain, and that there was no public information on what seal material profile would be suitable in the environment. So because of that gap, if you then design an experiment to test different sealing materials in this environment, you're keeping data on how they perform as a function of temperature and exposure to the corrosion. That experiment would be eligible for shred, and we could then claim the eligible expenditures around labor and materials, potentially contractors that were involved in analyzing it for your shred. So at a very high level, I have what expenditures qualify for shred. So once we have an eligible project, the more interesting part usually is, what is it worth? We are allowed to claim the direct labor, the wages for those involved in the project. So that would be the actual hours they worked on the project, ideally tracked by an hourly timesheet, times their wages. And we can claim wages for both specified and non-specified employees. So those being owners who own more than 10% of the corporations being specified, and just our non-specified employees who do not have any ownership. We can also claim the overhead costs associated with the performing the shred project. There's two methods that you're allowed to choose. The proxy method allows you to take an additional 55% of your labor costs to cover your overhead. And that's the most popular method within shred to calculate your overhead. Otherwise, you actually can look through the overhead policy and calculate up all of your eligible overhead expenditures line by line. And this choice is very important, and that's where the understanding of what's included or excluded work. And so, for example, if you had a bunch of electrician costs, et cetera, to set up your pilot plant, potentially your actual overhead costs might exceed 55% of your internal labor, and doing it the traditional method of claiming each individual overhead cost may be more profitable. So that analysis of which method is more beneficial can be conducted on a year-to-year basis, but once you make that selection for that period, you must stick with it. Most of our clients and most claimants do pick this proxy method, where we just mark up the labor by 55%. In addition to labor, we can claim the materials that you either consume in the trial or are transformed to be the physical prototype that's being tested. We can claim Canadian eligible contractors who are performing that type D support work, the engineering, design, math analysis, etc. They're eligible at 80%. And so the justification there is that contractors' invoices likely include a profit and an overhead component. So they are only eligible at 80% for the credit. We can also claim any of your payments to third-party post-secondary institutions to participate in their research. So again, Canadian institutions are research institutes where you are providing funds to either support or get access to their research. And we can claim capital expenditures for SR&ED here in Manitoba. That's specific to the Manitoba policy. And then this is one of the changes that is potentially coming for taxation years starting post-December 2024 as part of the announcements made in the fall economic statement. So currently capital expenditures are not allowed federally, but are allowed here in Manitoba. And that would be the purchase of things like lab equipment, et cetera, that are exclusive for the use for your research project. This is just a quick table, and it will be in our the slide deck provided. This estimate of what SR&ED is worth is specific to Canadian-controlled qualifying corporations, Canadian-controlled private corporations that qualify for the 35% rate. And then this example, we've renounced the non-refundable Manitoba ITCs. So in this example, we're assuming the company does not owe Manitoba taxes and therefore does not want the 7.5% credit that reduces their taxes owing. So just a quick demonstration of what it's worth. On $100,000 of salaries, we would increase that cost by 55% to cover your overheads, and we would claim $155,000 for SR&ED. We would calculate the Manitoba credit, and then the federal 35% credit would apply on the difference between the original expenditures minus what you receive from the province. So your total return in SR&ED credits on salary, on the base salary, is 61, almost 62%. Materials, those don't get marked up. So we're getting about just under 40% here in Manitoba. Contractors and third-party payments, as we do reduce those by 20%, there's about a 32% return. And again, in Manitoba, currently, only the Manitoba credit would apply for SR&ED capital, so it's only 7.5%. And again, this is a line item that we potentially will see as part of a legislation changes that hopefully will come into effect in the spring budget 2025. So these next 3 slides are just a couple of the changes that are coming to the SR&ED program. So the last major update to SR&ED legislation was back in 2014, where they removed capital, and there haven't been many significant changes to the legislation since. However, in the fall economic statement, they did announce that they are looking at increasing the annual expenditure limits on which you would earn that 35% tax credit from 3 million to 4.5. So currently, for a CCPC, you would earn 35% credit on your first $3 million of eligible expenditures. They're increasing that to 4.5 million. They're also increasing taxable capital phase-out thresholds for the enhanced credit. Again, this is a very tax specific and technical type change that's coming. But currently, if you as a corporation or a group of companies have taxable capital of over 50 million, you are no longer eligible for the enhanced credit. And they're changing those thresholds up to the threshold at which you would no longer be eligible for that credit to be 75 million. Yeah, I do believe that the slide deck will be shared afterwards. There's also they're also extending the enhanced refundable SR&ED credit to Canadian public corporations, which is a very significant change to the program. And they're looking to restore the eligibility of capital expenditures. So again, those were removed back in 2014 and will come back hopefully come back into effect in 2025 as part of budget 2025. The way it's been said is it would be effective for property acquired in taxation periods beginning on or after December 16th, 2024. So if you had a December 31st year end and you've just started a new tax period, potential capital expenditures for SR&ED that you're buying right now may be eligible for the credit if these legislation changes come into effect. So it's really important to stay on top of these announcements if you have, or if you are claiming SR&ED or have the potential to claim SR&ED, as these legislative changes, if they do come into effect, will potentially add a whole new area of eligible expenditures, that being the capital. There also recently was, last year, there was a bill that received royal assent and included an amendment to the definition of government assistance. So one thing that I did not mention when we had our chart of what your SR&ED is worth is if you are receiving funding from NRC, the IRAP program, or other government entities, We can usually stack the programs against each other, but we can't double dip. And what that means is when we calculate our eligible expenditures, we must then remove any assistance we receive from other government entities. There are some programs that are repayable loans that the government has used. Prairies Can, for example, has repayable loans for some encouraging R&D and development. And in the past, there was a view by the CRA that these were government assistance. In this Budget Implementation Act, there was a definition that now defines a government assistance that will not include excluded loans, which are loans that do have reasonable repayment terms. So even if it is a zero interest loan from a public authority, you may no longer have to consider that as government assistance against your SR&ED. The interesting thing there is if any of you have claimed SR&ED in the past and have had these loans and potentially reduced your SR&ED, you are allowed to go back and change the impacts to that back to January 2020. So if that situation does impact you, it's important to speak with your accountants to look at how you may be able to claim back or reduce the impact that those had on your SR&ED back then. Finally, on January 28th, so just a month ago, I guess, the CRA renamed their previous application policy around penalties to have a policy around gross negligence in SR&ED. The CRA had done a public update of the 2020 program with CPA Canada last year. And as part of that, they had mentioned they had seen an increase in non-compliant claims. And I believe these policy updates may be just part of that, of increasing the compliance and reducing the amount of what they were calling willfully negligent claimants. And so that is, you may be, the CRA may consider charges of gross negligence in any of the following situations. So if you overstate your amounts for which your SR&ED incentives are being claimed, that you include amounts in respect of a project where there's clear evidence that you knew that the project did not involve SR&ED activities, that you described activities that actually did not take place or did not take place in the actual year, that you claimed amounts that do not qualify for SR&ED after being advised in writing that these amounts do not qualify. So if you've had a previous negative audit and been advised what was eligible or ineligible and continue to claim for amounts where the CRA has indicated to you that those expenditures are ineligible. Or if you have previously miscalculated your tax incentives and you continue to calculate in the same manner in future taxation years, that would also be considered gross negligence. The importance here, so the CRA, obviously, gross negligence, fraud, etc., is obviously always wrong. But the interesting thing is the CRA specifically launching this new policy to define where these gross negligent penalties apply. I would say now more than ever, it's really important that when you are claiming your expenditures, that you have the documentation to support that what you said occurred did in fact take place, and that you have properly considered eligibility of the expenditures that you've claimed. And so that is really what the focus of our March 12th webinar will be, around how to make sure we're properly documenting each category of expenditures, documenting our project, such that if in the event the project was audited by the CRA, that you could fully support the claim and that you don't put yourself at risk to be viewed in any of these ways. So that concludes the formal part of our conversation. I have my contact information, and obviously both Mia and World Trade Centre will have a copy of the slide deck to be distributed. I would again caution, like most of the slides, the reference material, I have provided a link or a website. Canada.ca is where the CRA has all of their policies posted. And I would encourage, if you believe you may be eligible for SR&ED, to explore the resources available on the government's website. Or again, feel free to reach out to myself or your corporate accountant to discuss the program in more detail specific to your fact pattern.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea. So we will open up the chat for questions here for the Q&A session. Also, if you want to just unmute, put your mic on. Oh, we already have some questions coming in. Can you go back to show contact slides? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you meant for myself or but you could also get in touch with us via the World Trade Center and Mia as well.
Yeah, and you guys will receive the slides as well, so you'll have all that information. We do have a question from Danielle. How extensive does the search about what data is already in the public domain needs to be?
So it does not have to be as in-depth as one might do for a patent. However, we have seen in auditors will go onto Google Scholar and generally search the topic, similar to just go on Google and generally search the topic. So if they, do a quick search and there's a very obvious solution, you at a minimum should have done those same things. Though it does not have to be to the same degree as one would have to do for a patent to prove that your claims are unique and defensible. But I would say, we usually in assessing a new project would at minimum go onto Google Scholar and understand what is the knowledge base within the public domain. I would look at similar research articles, and usually in their forward they will have really good reference documents of why their research project was addressing a gap, and I would keep records of that, of at least one or two recent articles in that area of that establish that there is a gap in that domain knowledge. So I would say it doesn't have to be that extensive, but if a reviewer can get something quickly out of the public domain, you better have an answer as to why that was not applicable in your situation, or why you need to go beyond what is available. They definitely, again, like there is often, if you search even more in depth, there may be an answer in Europe or China or from another competitor. And it really is more that if you are an experienced person in that area of the industry and it is not well known, that is usually sufficient enough. But the more journal articles or references that you have, maybe it's an industry publication that states this is an evolving area, any of those references are really important to just keep. And again, important to do at the start of your project so that you maybe have them date stamped at the time, especially for AI, et cetera, where if you don't file for another year and you might not have an audit for a few months after that, what's uncertain today may not be the case in a year and a half from now. So having those snapshotted at the start of your project is important.
There was another question. I did not forget, it was Mike. Okay. Yeah, at the beginning he said, are interdisciplinary programs eligible for SR&ED? I am working to launch a service organization that will revolve around all the SDGs, which of course involve natural, applied, and social sciences.
Yeah, so as long, even if it's, a lot of our projects are interdisciplinary, and as long as it does involve natural or applied sciences, that could be eligible. The uncertainties have to be in a natural or applied science. So as I mentioned, we see a lot right now of, maybe someone doing a software system to predict consumer behavior in a commercial sense. That might be involving the area of social science. That might not be eligible in of its own, but within your data analytics or the software applications, if there are uncertainties, the work could be eligible. So it's really about within that multidisciplinary program, establishing where there's uncertainty, and then that would have to fit within one of the natural or applied sciences. Mm-hmm. And if anyone is hoping to come to the March 12th seminar and has any specific questions on documentation that they'd want to make sure they're addressed, happy if you share those via World Trade Center, and we'll make an effort to incorporate those answers to those questions as part of that program. We do have a bit more time in that session. I believe, Eric, we have
2 hours.
An hour and a half, 2 hours. Yeah. So there will be more time to dive into some of these concepts and maybe even take a few more specific examples to discuss in depth at that time.
Perfect. Okay, I think this concludes today's webinar. Again, thanks everyone for joining this webinar, and thank you, Andrea, for all this insightful presentation. If you haven't registered from the plan to claim the role of documentation in SR&ED success on March 12th, please see the link in the chat. This 2-hour session will have Andrea provide strategic guidance on documentation. We have also included other upcoming events from MEIA and WTC Winnipeg, so please make sure to check those out. Thank you again, Andrea, and thank you, Heather, and we'll hopefully see you online on March 12th.